All right. I'm keeping the live stream going. I didn't actually get to watch the um, Luke's live stream. I was teaching class earlier, but I'm just gonna start this up, and maybe we'll get some people in here and keep keep the old thing going. So, if anyone would like to join me, the link is there in the description. I've got here we go. We got some Chad here. What's up, Chad?
What up, Jess? God, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, man. It's been a while. I've been kind of in work world. I've been working for money.
Hey, well, that's what we do. It's one of the things we do. Uh, Fortunately, get to do.
Yeah, for sure. Were you listening to the stream before this, or
I was. I was.
I'm out of the
I might
loop?
actually. I might have a little bit of robot-y issues. So if that happens, just ignore me and talk. You know.
All
But
right.
no, it was. It was. It was. It's good. It was good to see Fuzzy and interesting biblical discussion. And then I threw uh, a little wrench in there at the end, talking about the seeming inevitability of things, which makes me think of the eternal now. So
Uh,
that's why I hopped on.
can you give me like the quick summary of like what they were kind of talking about before Luke had to go?
They were talking about, I think, sin and um, repentance and something to do with Cain and Solomon and just I think different uh, religious slash social differences within the Israel community. I think I don't know, man. Me. I don't know shit.
Yeah. What was the wrench you threw in at the end?
Well, I was thinking about how sometimes I think. Well, here I'll sum it up. Whether kind of something like whether Eve ate the fruit of good and evil or the fruit of life, either way, shit was coming.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And which had me thinking about something that like Joseph was saying how even the lepers, like leprosy itself isn't a sin. Maybe sin caused it, but and so I was just kind of thinking about that kind of stuff and thinking about how maybe sin and progress and repentance are all part of the makeup of nature, the nature of reality, of actuality, of love, perhaps. Um,
Right.
Even though it's terrible, you know, terrible love.
Yep. Um, I don't know if this is. I don't know what the source of this was. I I kind of want to say it was a Jewish midrash, but I'm not sure. So maybe, but it's about Eve um, going to eat the fruit, and um, the story was, or the person was imagining like what was going on in that moment, and like what it, and so they were saying that um, when she goes to eat the fruit, she is presented with everything that's going to happen to the world. Like, so she's given this vision of everything that happens after eating the fruit, both the good and the bad. So it's like a coming of consciousness. It's like awakening, but it's also being thrown out of the garden. There's a loss of innocence, but then this chance of being restored again by God, being and then this because of the fall, there's a greater restoration in the end. And she basically, after seeing all this, after seeing all the suffering of the world as well as all the good that happens, she then decides to eat. She thinks it's going to be worth it. And so she doesn't eat. I think about that story because she doesn't eat out of ignorance or out of her sort of selfishness. She eats out of a knowledge of what's going to happen. And she's given the choice, like, do you really want all this to happen? Like, look at the terrible things that will happen. But it will also be something that will allow, I don't know, something more
Well,
to
yeah,
happen.
that makes me think of something Yosef said as well about how there, somewhere in the Jewish literature, it talks about there are something like 900 previous worlds, but this is the only world that seems to have a story attached to it. And so, there's a particular sacrifice that a terrible sacrifice that has to be made. And, it's I was thinking about um, like many, like there's no such thing as well, no, I'm sorry, like a pacifist as a pacifist until they aren't, and and like this is my whole problem with the theology of trying to get into heaven. I think like it's a really flat concept, and it's like, would I be willing I hope when the time comes, if the time ever comes, where I have to make a decision between a good thing and a terrible thing, I hope I make the right decision. However, sometimes I wonder if the terrible decision is a sacrifice. Like this is my whole silly idea about Hodor. Like Hodor is driven to die and hold the door for somebody else. But I mean, it's like I can't. I'm having difficulty framing this because I've never been in a situation like this. But do you take the life of somebody else to save the life of another? Is that the same concept as giving your life for somebody else? I don't know. I know this is all really, really bad stuff to talk about and stuff like that, but I think it's okay to kind of discuss it because who knows if the time ever comes, will I have to face those things? Same thing where if I ever land in a nursing home and and I'm faced with the option of, do I continue to suffer till the end, or do I sign a paper that says you can take me out? What do I do? And I hope I make the right decision there too.
Yeah, but it's one of those things, like, it's hard to know what the right decision is because everything, like, the consequences are uncalculatable,
Right.
And so, like, you can't rationally explore every possible, like, you don't know. And so
Right.
that's why we have like concepts of love your neighbor,
That's why we have good stories.
self-sacrifice rather than murder, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that's why there's good stories too. I mean,
Yeah.
I just watched the film Solace for the first time a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was going to be kind of stupid, and it turned out to be pretty deep. And at the end there, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but there's it wrestles with some of these questions. And a man has a daughter who has leukemia, and she's suffering in pain, and she's an adult. And meanwhile, he's got a job where he has to try and find this other killer who's basically killing people and mercy killing them. And so like he's like, oh, this guy's evil. But as it turns out, spoiler alert, he actually um, puts his daughter out of her misery, out of love, and it's like I hope I never have to make that decision.
Yeah. Yeah. So Luke brought up the movie Arrival. You know that movie?
Yes, I'm trying to remember it though.
So like, I'm gonna spoil it. So the aliens like come down and they have their own language. It's like this visual language that's actually like cyclical.
Oh yeah,
And,
yeah.
and part of it was like they go up. So the ship is down on Earth. They go up inside the ship, and they're kind of making first contact. And there's a big transparent wall between them, a big wall of glass, and the aliens are communicating through this writing that is basically looks like
Rorschach or something.
Yeah,
Right.
Rorschach kind of circles, and then this linguist lady, she is the main one that she's a linguist, and so she's interacting with aliens, figures out what the language is and whatever. But while she's interacting with them, she's getting all these memories are being triggered of her daughter who ends up who was sick and then passes away. And then the kind of, so like while she's interacting with the aliens, she'll like have a memory of her daughter saying something to her that's actually like it's kind of like you get to the point where like, oh, the aliens are talking to her through her memories. But it gets really strange because at the end of the movie you realize she never had a daughter yet. These memories were not memories. They're actually visions of the future, and she's going to have this daughter with this guy she falls in love with, and then so she knows everything's going to happen. She knows that her daughter's going to get sick. It's going to be bad, and she's given the choice to. She's fully conscious. Like this is what the comment says. The woman was ready to know the man was not, and this happens in the relationship. The man figures out that she knew this was going to happen. She still went through with it, and he leaves her, divorces her, and so she's left to kind of like, she's like, it's worth it,
It's worth the love,
yeah. So, anyway, this gets on to something I've been trying to make a video about Job's wife. Job's wife has this short little line in the book of Job, and she basically says to him after all the tragedy, do you still hold on to your integrity? Curse God and die. And she, there's an interpretation that's basically like she's just like a tool of the devil at this point, trying to tempt Job or whatever. But it's a lot more nuanced than that, because in her short little line, she says two things that happen in the scene in heaven. So when God and Satan are talking, God talks about Job's integrity, and Satan talks about Job cursing God. No one's privy to this. Job has no idea, but she has an intuition about it, and I think kind of imperfectly she tells Job this. She basically gives Job the whole context of the entire situation, which is you're still holding on to your integrity. There's a temptation to curse God, and then she also brings death into it. And so anyway, the point is that she's not just a temptress. I don't think she's a temptress at all. She's a catalyst. And so what a catalyst is it's something that's introduced that begins a transformation or a change. So Job, like you can imagine, after the tragedy, Job is sitting in the ash heap and he's just waiting to die, basically. He's just patiently waiting to die after he said, The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And now he's just going to wait. And it isn't until I think when his wife speaks to him, something inside of him starts to change that he's not ready for. But she understands at some level. And then that launches us into basically the whole rest of the book, because all this happens in the first 2 chapters. She speaks at the end of chapter 2, and then it just launches Job into this thing where this transformation happens, and it's all because, I think it's because of his wife. I think she plays that key role, and she plays that, like so many biblical women play that role of catalyst, where they may have just like they may show up for a sentence or like 2 sentences, like sometimes it's barely anything, but they like change everything after that point.
Well, they do always, even our wives,
Yeah, and so Jordan Peterson talks about how women bring men to consciousness. I think that's kind of true.
Yeah. That's where heaven, but also where heaven and earth meet. I think that they are the suture that buckle us to heaven and earth, something like that. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
Sorry.
So Job's wife, she comes with the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, she absolutely. So Job's wife, there's one interpretation where people are like, yeah, she's just a tool of the devil. She's a temptress. But there's also the very sympathetic interpretation of like, she's suffered everything Job has, except for the skin disease, apparently. But she's got to deal with all the tragedy that Job's dealt with, and like, even the way she speaks is very like launches Job into his first lament, and the way Job speaks after that is very informed by his wife's sort of attitude, I think. And so she provides that moment for him to launch off, and there's many discoveries that Job makes along the way, and this is all, the whole story, I think, is about trying to find the wisdom of God, and so this no small thing that she launches Job into. So, but it's directly connected to the knowledge of good and evil in the tree.
Is wisdom easily cultivated? I'm also going to start roboting here very fast, so don't alarm yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. Is wisdom easily cultivated, or is there a price to pay?
Well, here's something interesting. This is a broad generalization, but Proverbs is kind of about wisdom that people should have, wisdom that people should cultivate. So this is wisdom for yourself, kind of. There are some sort of more mystical parts, like that personifies wisdom walking and calling in the streets in Proverbs. But generally speaking, Proverbs is about the wisdom we should cultivate as individuals and as families and as a society in order to live correctly. And then Ecclesiastes sort of comes along. Oh, Sherry's in here. So, hey, Sherry. So Ecclesiastes comes along and kind of points out the limits to that wisdom. So Ecclesiastes is like even if you do live correctly by all this wisdom, the wisdom of Proverbs, like there's still a time for growing and a time for harvest, a time for being born and a time to die. There's a time for, all that stuff. And so there's a limit. Ecclesiastes is just sort of about the limits of human wisdom. And then Job, and people like Ecclesiastes for this reason, because basically kind of like to make it about my own church experience, like you kind of get told the rules of how a Christian should live. And then Ecclesiastes is like, all right, here are the limits of these rules that, you know, sometimes like you can do all the right things and still terrible stuff will happen to you and it's out of your control. Like there's no guarantee that if you do the right things, only good things will happen to you. So, so Ecclesiastes kind of lifts up, like if something bad happens to you, you have this like, you feel terrible because you're like, what did I do wrong? And Ecclesiastes is like, sometimes there's just there's time for being born and there's a time for dying. And so there's a sense of, I don't want to say fatalism, but there's a sense of inevitability to things that like are just out of our control. Just so, but then Job comes along, and then Job asks the question, what is the wisdom that God has for doing all of this, for creating everything? And that's a different question than the wisdom that we have and that we can cultivate. It's also a different question than the limits of our own wisdom. It's a question of what is the wisdom that God has in the very beginning, and what is this all about? And that's the kind of journey that Job gets launched off on when his wife comes in and she acts as that catalyst. And so there's two types of wisdom. There's the wisdom that we can cultivate and that we can have in our own life, you know. And then there's also the wisdom of God. And there's some overlap there, of course, but there are also different questions. Like, what is God doing? What is his wisdom?
Well, yeah. Well, this is why I'm not a big fan of the like the idea of living to get to heaven. I don't think that it's a weird, not even a cart before the horse thing. It's like, I don't know. It's like it's just a, I don't know. To me, it seems disordered something. And it, I don't know. I could be wrong on that though.
Well,
I mean, it's a distraction.
The whole premise of getting to heaven is sort of wrapped up in like, what do I need to do? What do I need to believe? What do I need to participate in order for, you know, that's that Proverbs wisdom. That's that wisdom of like doing the right thing, believing the right things, to get to heaven. Like, I feel like that's level one. Like it's not, I don't think it's, but you soon reach a limit because you're like all you have to do is ask the question, like, if the whole point is to get to heaven, then why am I here right now? Why am I not in heaven? So right. The whole thing must not be the point. And people will answer this differently. In the church, the whole answer is, well, your job is to get more people in heaven. And then it feels like a pyramid scheme at that point. You're just like, you know, get people in heaven that will get more people in heaven that'll get more people in heaven. And you're like, all right, that's, and then that's sort of like, then you're at another limit and you're like, what is the reason for all these people? Why are we all going to heaven? And what's the point of doing all this anyway? And so
here's a question, like, does getting more people into heaven translate into like a reward for you too? You know? Like, yeah. There's this unarticulated reward system going on here too, you know, that nobody ever talks about, right? Because that wouldn't be, you know, that couldn't be a good reason. But right. I mean, I heard it many times that, you know, there's a crown waiting for you, and
with jewels.
And it's, yeah, with jewels, yeah, and I never really comprehended the whole idea of crown until I learned about the meaning of crowns in the Orthodox wedding ceremony. And the crowns that they put on the bride and groom are crowns of martyrdom. And what's really beautiful about that ceremony is that they switch them a few times during the ceremony. Right? So it's not just your crown. You share your crown. And it's martyrdom. And that puts a whole different twist on it.
Well, it's a lot like that story out of that Arrival thing. That's just so beautiful and terrible, and like it was worth it, knowing damn well. I mean, listen, we all know damn well we ain't living forever on this earth, and like, so that even though this woman knows that her daughter is going to die. A painful death, and she will be divorced and all this stuff. It was worth the love that was made, and I think this is the other wisdom you're speaking of. I mean, maybe it's something like sure, heaven, great, but I read like. And I don't know what that means exactly, but it's something like that, and so that we might have a glimpse of real love. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but
yeah. Well, I was listening to the latest Exodus series. I forget what number it is. It's like 13, or I forget which one they're at. But Dennis Prager like has this sort of realization during it, which is pretty powerful, and it was about concerning God's regret. So Moses is up on the mountain, and the people start making the idol down below, and God's like, I'm going to destroy the people. And Moses is like, no, don't destroy the people. And connecting it back to, I think it's in Genesis, just before the flood, when it says that God's heart was saddened that he made man because of all the evil that was being done. And so there's like, he almost put God in the role of that woman, and he like realizes like everything's going to go terrible, and he's even saddened by his choice.
That's the fullness.
Yeah. And so there's this, and Sherry and I have talked about this some, but just the way that God is totally misunderstood, basically get painted as this guy who's, just this powerful God that's trying to destroy sinners and evildoers and not very merciful or anything, but God's doing something that no one can see, that is on its face totally reasonable to misunderstand and not get what God is doing with reality, and then he still continues it, because what happens is that there's actually like real people that are that are made, and he's just so happy that I mean, that's his purpose. His purpose is to create real children, and his purpose isn't necessarily to be fully understood or fully loved in the way that if we did understand like what he was doing, that we would feel in our hearts towards him. Like he's just constantly demonized and painted in the wrong light by all kinds of different people, and it's his sort of divine humility, the humility of God, that he doesn't make it absolutely obvious, because to make it absolutely obvious would to be
it defeats the purpose.
It defeats the purpose, yeah.
It would be no God at all.
Well, the thing is, as a parent, when you give your child a hard task, let's say for the development of their character, you don't want to sit down and explain to them how this is going to develop their character, because all they're going to do is strain at the bit, in a sense, right? You want to teach them how to move under the bit. As a horse person, I'm thinking of my horse analogies, right? So like when you're training a horse and you put tension on the bit, the first thing the horse wants to do is strain against it. And you have to show them that you're going to allow them not to suffer under the pressure too long. So that's why it's called pressure and release, the training, right? So you apply the pressure, but then you release the pressure when they do the thing that you want them to do. And then you apply more pressure when you want to go a step further. And this is what you do as a parent, right? You put your kids under a certain amount of pressure, but then you release the pressure because you don't want them to feel trapped, right? Mm-hmm. Because when a horse feels trapped under pressure, it goes backwards. We have a term for that in Christianity. It's called backsliding, and there's a reason for backsliding. If you put it parallel to the training of a horse, mm-hmm. right? There's too much pressure, and there's never a release to the pressure.
Yeah.
And then after many hours of training, suddenly the horse now understands that you love it. Okay, you are gracious to it. And so it complies with the pressure. And it releases the pressure by moving under the bit, right? So it tucks its head in, and that's when the pressure is released. And then it moves in a way that you want it to. And you know, like when you were talking about how God is misunderstood and he's demonized and so on. I mean, when you have teenagers, that's what happens to you as a parent. You become stupid, right? Yeah. And mean and illogical and all those things, right? And all of your motivation for what you're doing for your children is hidden to them. Mm-hmm. It's totally hidden.
Yeah. Yep.
I was thinking about the idea of God being surprised. So even though God has created, I think about were there moments where he was surprised, and what came to mind was when the woman touches his garment in the crowd, and there's a moment that seems like a moment of surprise, like, or even being on the cross, or being tempted in the desert or in the wilderness, and like, so we can easily mischaracterize God and say, well, God's this evil son of a, and he does all this, but like, somehow I think we shouldn't, we can't be separated from the reality of God, and that I think God might just be, as, even though there's kind of like this inevitability thing happening or playing out, the story is playing out, that he's right there with us. And I know this sounds kind of Pollyannish and stuff, but when I've had realizations like this that are they're like these moments, these awakenings, it's like, yeah. And would I have changed it? Would I have changed would I have had it be different? Part of me says sure, but then the other part says, man, but there's like a glory here that would have never been realized. So I don't know.
No, I think I think, if God is infinite, there's that little line that's like, what is the infinite lack? The infinite lacks lack. It doesn't lack anything. And so we have the infinite and the finite is the thing that lacks. And so by lacking something, you possess something the infinite doesn't. Now, this is all within God in the Trinity, I think, but without getting into that, just infinite and the finite, and because of the lack the finite has, there can be a relationship between the infinite and the finite that's more than just the infinite itself, if that makes sense. Like, so there's a dynamism there that like, you think of the infinite God and you think of something that's, even if God is infinite and it appears static, it's everything everywhere all at once kind of thing. Like what but then when I think about like the finite, something particular, it's just me here in Kansas. And so there's something that God gains from having a relationship with the finite. And it's something very particular and very, well, it's personal. And so
would you, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is revelation. God is revealed in the particular, in us. We are the image of God, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, and this gets back to what you were talking about before with God being hidden, right, and misunderstood. And so what he gains from us is revelation. We reveal. This is what Jesus said. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a revelation of God,
mm-hmm.
of who God really is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And because of Jesus, we actually get a picture of what the infinite is doing, because you kind of, the infinite transcendent God is not just the static infinite transcendent. God gives himself in some way that I can't fathom in order to create the world. And that's what Christ reveals to us, is that somehow the infinite is doing that towards us. That's like the self-sacrificial side of the Father. I don't know if I'm treading in heretical waters or what, but that's what Christ reveals, is that the infinite is actually doing that in order to bring creation into reality, in order that it's real. Like God pours himself out. And I see that especially like in Psalm like 104. God is constantly just serving creation, pouring himself out, pouring himself out, pouring himself out, pouring. And this is the infinite, this is the transcendent doing this for the creation. And then, that's what Christ does for us, and him and the Father are one. And so, yeah, anyway, you were going to say something, Chad.
I wonder if here's a weird question. I wonder if God knows how. Like
If
not
God
in the way
knows
that
what?
we wonder how. Just how. How are things? How, like
Oh,
in
yeah.
the way that, we like I know how whatever. Well, I don't even know how babies are made. Let's just face the facts there. Like, I don't know how that. Like, let's be really honest about that. Like,
Chad,
I
I
know
can
how.
tell you, Chad. Would you like me to know?
But I mean, no, the reality of it is, I understand things that happen, that help, that come about, but I don't know how. Uh, like like a life is animated. Okay. And I don't think anybody does, actually. I still don't think that they know how a seed turns into a blade of grass. But so, in that way, I wonder if God knows how, and is it even necessary to know how? In other words, I wonder if God cares about the nuances. And I don't know. I'm I'm trying to be as dynamic as I can on my thinking around this, because it's really hard when you have words. It's like the worst form of communication there is. So, but I wonder, as concerned as we are with the how, I wonder if God is. If why would God want or care about the how if he is? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, like when part of that's answered for me, like in the way that I see how God serves creation. So there's a way in which God serves the blade of grass by letting it be a blade of grass, and the blade of grass gets to be itself and just be the type of grass that it is, and God's not necessarily involved in the God's involved in every part of going from a seed to a blade of grass, but it's a serving, it's a nurturing, it's that kind of thing. It's not like this top down, like, all right, I'm going to design a system that's going to systematize the creation of grass. I'm going to create this seed that's got this DNA in it, and when I put it in the ground, it's going to make more. Like, I don't think that's how God does it. I think it's a lot more. I don't know. I always picture it sort of bottom up in my mind, but I don't know if that's the right way to describe it.
Well, let me ask you this. I'll say a word, and you'll see image, and then I'll ask you, how did that image come about? So I'll just say apple. When I said apple, did you see an apple in your mind?
Yes.
Like, did you? Right. So it's like, well, how is that even possible? Like, how is that? And so it's like
How is that
that, like
possible?
when speaking something
Yeah.
into existence. Yeah, but I'm saying, like, you don't know how that is. It just is.
Yeah.
And so when God spoke us into existence, what's the use of knowing how if you just can? So how
Well,
is
this is the
useful.
thing. I think
I
this
don't know if
is.
that's
I
making
think
sense.
this is really important. God didn't speak us into existence. He spoke creation into existence, but he didn't speak us into existence. He said, "Let us make." There's a difference. And then he played with some dirt, right? And actually, John Bear makes the great point that the Hebrew there is "let us be making." So it's an ongoing process, right? And that's what we find ourselves in, you know, born, childhood, teenagerhood, adulthood, death, right? That's the process of becoming. And so we're not just spoken into existence. God is making us. And I think that's what Jess is talking about, Josh, or whatever your name is.
Dave, doesn't matter.
That's what
I'm
Jess
Chad,
is talking
also
about,
Chad.
is that it's about it's also Chad. It's about becoming real. And yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to make that point because I think it's really important.
What's this guy saying? I'm
He's too schizo for
this
this right
now.
now. We're freaking people out.
Yes. Yes, so are we, Andrew. Don't worry. That was a really good talk. I don't know what else to say. I think you know what I think I want to make a news video. So I think I'm gonna hop off and try and throw something
Yep.
together.
All right.
But
Thanks, Chad.
God, I love you guys. It's great to see you, man. And
Yeah.
as well as
See you,
you.
Chad.
You too, man.
Thank you. Creation is still unfolding. You know, that what comes to my mind when I see that is that I don't know where the verse is, but all creation groans and waits. And it's a picture of birth. It's a birthing metaphor, actually. It's a travailing in birth.
Yeah. things are.
It's not just
and-
like it's not just it's not an unfolding like you unfold a blanket. Like a blanket is, right? And when you unfold it, you get to see all of it. But and there is a truth in that. Like it is unfolding in that sense. But it's also very messy. It's a birth. Like it's filled with pain and suffering and fear and blood and water and right, all that stuff.
Mhm.
Patience, you know, the waiting.
Yeah.
the
There's
waiting
no
game.
there's no rushing the process. It happens in its own
And
time.
humility, because right, like and humility, like Chad was saying, I don't know how you know, a child is conceived. If you want to talk
Mhm.
about the like the, you know, the bitter root of the thing. And you have that sense as a parent when your child is born, it's a miracle. Like you don't feel like you made it. It's not like, look what I did. You know, it's a miracle.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something you go through. It's something you bear, and then
Well, you participate in it, right? Like there's
Yeah.
this sense that you've participated in something that is just beyond your understanding,
Mhm.
I think. Yeah.
Well, my experience of giving birth. Joke.
Well, you had one. You had one. And the observer's experience is always super interesting.
What's that? Oh, you mean like
Well,
observing
you know, it's
birth?
like if something if you go through something, whatever it might be, and then someone tells you about what they saw happening, it's two different stories. Like
Yeah.
it's totally two different experiences altogether, right?
Yep. Well, and it's also different from the midwife's perspective and the idiot husband's perspective. Because the midwife knows what's happening. Like
Yeah, I
she's
missed
seen
that
this
story.
before.
So,
The what?
oh, I thought you were gonna. You told a story at the beginning of the stream that I missed, and I thought that you were referring to it, but you weren't.
No. Just like, I mean, as a husband, like especially when my oldest son was born, like I didn't know what was going on or what to do, and even when my wife was like, can you please walk with me now, hold me up now, do this, do that, I was kind of just like, what am I supposed to do? You're just gonna boss me around? Like that was like a thought I had. And I don't know, I was completely useless. I feel bad about that, but I don't know what to, I don't know. So, yeah, but the midwife, like the midwife, like she was so helpful. She was so helpful. Like she came in, she's like, "Hey, do this, do that. Let me help you with that." Like she was very hands-on. Like, let's get you in a bath. Let's do this, do that, whatever. It was like a whole different. Like I was like, I wish I could be like her in this moment, but I'm not because I don't know all this stuff. And yeah.
Mhm. So here's my question. You titled this stream "The Eternal Now," and because I missed the first 15, 20 minutes, without getting in, you know, without repeating yourself, like what were you thinking about when you started the stream and titled it that?
I didn't think. I just titled it that, and then Chad joined me at the beginning, and he kind of summarized what they were talking about in the last stream because I didn't really know. I was at class, so I just watched the first few minutes of it, and then I saw that people were hankering for a continued stream, so I was like, well, let me start this up. So
yeah,
but
people
what did we
should
talk
join
about at the
us.
beginning? Yeah. I don't remember what we ended up talking about Eve. Well, you came in right about that point, but we started talking about Eve as a catalyst, and then whether she knew what was sort of happening when she ate the fruit and like all the consequences of it and yada yada yada. But and then that launched me into talking about Job's wife as catalyst, that she was able to start the transformation happening, and it has to do with the knowledge of good and evil. So like the knowledge of good and evil is that splitting that happens, which is not a good thing. But because that splitting, there can be a reconciliation, and in that reconciliation, things are actually greater than they were before. So it's that whole, innocence, loss of innocence, then maturity and reconciliation, and that whole sort of chestnut.
I heard a really interesting take on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in that conversation that Zevi Slavin had with Dov Elbaum. And he talked about how in Kabbalah, I hope I get this right, and if Yosef or Kezi are listening, they can correct me. In Kabbalah, it wasn't so much, okay, let me see if I can say this properly. The image was that it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Expand too much on that, but it gave me the impression, and like I said, if anybody who knows better is listening, please help me out. But this was my impression, was that you can't separate the knowledge of good and evil from life, like from actually living your life. Like this gets back to the Rilke quote, the point is to live everything, because it's in that life that you begin to be able to discern between good and evil. But the interesting thing about good and evil is that, like Jesus says, don't tear out the weeds, right? Let them grow up together, and then you can separate it at the harvest. Because if you tear them up beforehand, you're going to destroy some of the harvest. And is that a lot of weeds are beneficial to the soil. So there's weeds that have tap roots. Often you'll see in soil that's been disturbed. Is my internet connection terrible? Is it okay?
It's okay, but I think you're lagging a bit.
Yeah, I'm lagging. Anyway, I'll just say this quickly. Disturbed soil, you'll often get weeds that have tap roots. And the purpose of tap roots is to break open the soil so that oxygen can get in and rainwater, right? And then after those, you get other weeds that are nitrogen fixing so that they can impart nutrients to the soil. And if you leave that soil long enough and let the weeds come in, and they march in one after another. Like, 1 year you'll have like tons of dandelions, and then all of a sudden you won't have any dandelions anymore because their job is done, right?
Sounds like my front door.
Then you'll end up with fertile soil, right? So this is I'm saying all this to say that good and evil are that entangled with one another, okay? And so, yeah, if you separate the knowledge of good and evil from the tree of life, then you have a very one-sided perspective on what's good and evil. And you think that you can separate them, right? But they're entangled. They're entangled in life itself. So, yeah, anyway, I just thought that was a really interesting image to see that the Kabbalah talks about it being separated from the tree of life, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So I'll stop talking because I'm lagging now.
Oh, it's fine. it's I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard it in a podcast. Someone was saying that Martin Luther said, I think he said, if you're gonna sin, sin boldly. And then he had a guy that some cleric guy that he knew that was very like straight laced, buttoned up, did everything correctly, like, and Martin Luther apparently lost his temper with him and was like, I wish you would just go sin so that you could understand the grace of God. Because he was so like just straight and narrow and doing all the right things that even Martin Luther was like, come on, man, you don't know God's grace. Like, go do something, like, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, well, Martin Luther was sinning boldly. He married a nun. And he was a monk.
Did.
Imagine.
It's funny. So funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing about the knowledge of good and evil that's come out of like our conversations is just that it's impossible to what is it? It's impossible to know or to control any of it. And like, you know, there's obviously like my own conscience, and I shouldn't violate my own conscience. And then, so that's one thing. But as far as like me knowing out in the world what's good and what's not, sometimes it's very difficult. You know, it's the whole Chinese farmer thing. You never know what,
Yeah.
You know, and well, this is the other thing that I learned from Job is like, you need to be honest about things that you see that you think are bad. Don't pretend like everything's okay. Like, I get on my YouTube algorithm this lady, and she her channel's like called Non-Dualist or something like that. But she's very, very, she's like, all is one. There's no differentiation between anything. All is one kind of thing. And she goes down these very nihilistic routes. It's all very interesting, but it's so sad because she basically like just everything gets planed into just like an overall sort of what would it be, like beige goodness, like just some sort of nondescript, everything's okay. We don't really know good or evil, or we can't call anything good, we can't call anything evil, we just have to experience everything. And there's something about that that's not right, that like where Job, he just is like,
No.
he just cries out, and there's something about that, like we'll have a desire that like rises up within us, and you just have to like let it out. You'd be like, I do not like this. I wish I wish something was different. I wish I had this.
Yeah.
I wish I had that. Like, and to let that out and let God know, you know, he always hears the cries of his people. And you know, there's a very sort of mother baby image from that. Like the baby cries and the mother hears and then gives the baby what it needs. And so this non-dualist route is like almost like a baby telling other babies to not cry and just be content and like just suffer and
And if you die, it'll be okay.
Yeah. But not because dying's good or anything good will happen, but just because it's just how it is.
Yeah. And I mean, I do talk a lot about how it is and those things, but we also have to act in the world, right? Like we actually have to, like, this is what Luke's live stream was about this morning, was like judgment and discerning and these kinds of things. And you know, you can get yourself into a real mud puddle if you make absolute statements about these things, because there's always the flip side to it, right? Like this
Yeah,
is the thing. This is good and evil.
yeah. Even Hesney was talking about.
And I'm still wrestling. Yeah, like I'm still wrestling with it, and I think this is what it was interesting in the conversation this morning how the wrestling of Jacob with the angel came up, because this is essentially what we wrestle with, right? Is the good and evil that we experience in our lives, and how that
Mhm.
how we can integrate that into our worldview, and this is where I think humility and well, gratitude first and then humility come into play, right? So and that's going to work itself out in all kinds of ways, because there's all kinds of people in the world, right? And they're going to deal with it differently. But it is also true that what we mean for evil, God means for good, right?
Yeah.
So there is you know, like I have accused myself of being a fatalist. I'm like, no, you can't be a fatalist. You're being a fatalist, right? But there is a kind of fatalism to the journey that we're on, right? I just think that the outcome is good.
Right. Yeah. It's the good fatalism, whatever that is, if there's a word for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Sherry, maybe this will be a good time to stop. I've been going for an hour. I have some work to do today.
Yeah,
And then
me too.
I'm gonna play that Psalm 104 video that I made right here at the end, just to close things off. And I will see you next time.
Bye, Jess.
All right. All right, I'm going to play this video. It is Psalm 104. It's a video that I made, but I think it encapsulates a lot of what I think about God serving his creation, and hope you guys enjoy. Bless